and looking at what sort of stressors there are where they are changing incrementally but ever forward, sort of pressing the system where we need to understand what those impacts are going to be. And these are things like our expanding population, average changes in climate with climate change. There are other things where they're likely to change really dramatically very quickly. And these are more pulsed events, like the flood down at the Lytle Ranch in Washington County. And these are things where, in a relatively short period of time, the ecosystem can change. And these include things like surprises. Where we aren't monitoring them, we don't know that they're coming, yet they're there, and also extreme climate events. And so I wanted to talk about two of these things. One, sort of a change in projected average conditions, and one, pulse changes that occur. So one of the things that's going to drive changes over the next 50 years is what's happening to the Wasatch Front. Right? So current at the last census, the Wasatch Front, these 5 counties, we had a little over 2 million people. So 2.1 million people. We're projected over by 2050, so in the next 35 years, that number will be around 3.8 million. So we're going to add 1.7 million people to this already stressed system. And it's not just the number of people, but it's the number of households as well. And so as society changes, households are getting smaller, and it's those individual households that demand the resources and access. And what we see is that on average, our households are going to, it's projected that they will go from a little over 3 people per household to 2.6. And so we're going to add almost 1.5 million households as well. And we're going to do this in a system or in a state that's the second driest in the nation. And it's interesting that I've been working on a project that involves climate scientists and ecologists, but also engineers and social scientists. And we were in a meeting one day, and we said, why are we so stupid here in Utah? Why don't we recognize that we are so dry, and yet all of our development on the Wasatch Front demands water? And in sort of the classic environmental bent that I have, I was making speeches about how foolish we are. And there was a water engineer in the room, and he says, "You're an idiot." He says, "You don't, when we say second driest, that's true. That's true when we're talking about eastern Utah. It's true when we're talking about the Great Basin. But here on the Wasatch Front, if you're willing to average, we're actually pretty wet. If you're willing to average the valleys with the mountains, right? That they, when we combine those things, we're pretty measly." And so, and this was an idea that was captured by an ecologist about 60 years ago. His name's Lincoln Ellison, and this was back when science writing was readable. And he, in sort of the most prominent ecology journal in the nation, this was his second paragraph. He was describing the importance of studying montane systems. And he says, "As surely as a canyon opens upon the valley floor, so surely will one find a farm, a village, or a town. Each of these small islands of civilization is nourished as by a silver umbilical thread from snows that accumulate in the nearby highlands. If it were not for the higher lying, more humid mountains in the arid lowlands would never have been settled, and the flourishing and distinctive communities that the traveler passes through today would not exist." Right? The point that he's making is one that I really want to emphasize today. That this idea that, in fact, if we want to understand the future of Utah and what the boundaries are for Utah, we need to understand what's going on in the mountains. And when we actually put together a water budget, this becomes obvious. And so this is the budget, actually for the Salt Lake Valley, but it's really similar here in Utah, or in Utah County. And what you see is, so the blue line, or blue arrows coming in, that's the amount of precipitation we have. That's the capital that we have to work with when we're talking about water in these valleys. And what you see is that the mountains get about twice as much rainfall as the valleys. Well, the yellow arrows show the amount that's lost through evaporation or transpiration by plants, and what you see is that they're actually pretty close to one another. The difference is that the mountains get so much more and they lose less, and so there's a subsidy that comes into the valley, mostly by melting snow. And so the valley, growth in the valley is being subsidized by our mountains. And so understanding that subsidy is critical. And as scientists, we often forget what it is that we're actually seeing. And so I wanted to share with you the Provo River as I experienced it earlier this summer. And so this is the lower Provo. This is below the dam. You can then move into the middle Provo, and so this is the restoration area just below the Jordanelle Dam, and it was an area that has been transformed because of restoration. But then you get up into the Uintas, and you see these amazing freestone creeks where water is flowing, and then when you finally get to the upper part, up near the summit, up near Trial Lake, there's these series of pure, clean waterfalls that are magnificent, right? And they're fed by snow melt and by groundwater that comes from that snow. And you could spend your entire life and never find a place as beautiful as this, and it's about 50 miles from here. When we experience sort of the upper reaches of this watershed, this is oftentimes what we see and what we think about, because we tend to visit in the summer when it's not a blizzard. But this is the part of the system that really matters when we start thinking about planetary boundaries and climate change. It's what's going on with the snowpack. I haven't put in too many graphs, but here's one that is important to recognize. On the upper panels, what we have is the amount of water that's stored in snow. And so this is snow water equivalent, and it's measured in centimeters of water. And what you see here is the amount that has been observed at one monitoring station for the last 40 years. And it's an incredibly variable system. And so in 2011, they're on the left, and that dark line, it shows in November and December the snows began to accumulate, and through most of the winter we had this enormous snowpack, and it then begins to melt in May, and there's this huge pulse of water that comes down the river that we then can impound in Jordanelle and Deer Creek reservoirs, and sort of peak flow occurs in early June. Right, and just at the time when farmers need that water to grow crops, and where most people in Utah County are growing lawn. You can contrast that with the very next year, right? So in 2012, what we see is that again, we sort of start to accumulate snow, but now it begins to melt in April, right? It's a year where we got almost no snowfall. And by early May, all the snow is melted. It's about a month and a half earlier than the previous year. And now we have a very different system that we have to work with. And so we've got this dynamic system. What's going to happen with climate change? Well, climate's already changing, right? If we look over the last 100 years and look at trends in temperature, Utah has already changed significantly. The trend over the last 100 years is that we've warmed by about 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees Celsius, and we're probably in store for another 4 degrees Celsius warming.
Locally or?
This is locally. So in the state of Utah, this is what the trend is.